Hi guys, this is Mrs. Bartlett reporting live from my kitchen today. It's day 3 and I've got some fascinating information for you about logistic growth and flattening the curve. I'm sure that you've heard about flattening the curve if, like you've turned on any news station or opened up any sort of media or had a conversation with anyone. Pretty sure you've heard of it. So I want to tell you what that all means scientifically, of course. And here's the chart that you keep seeing on news stations or variations of it. We've got the number of cases, the time since the first case. So here the first case of COVID-19 would be, and then they're saying without protective measures. So if we didn't quarantine or wash our hands or, take any measures to try and prevent or to slow the spread, then we would have this peak right here that would exceed our healthcare system capacity. Whereas if we do quarantine and wash our hands and take a lot of other measures, then we can stretch that out. So same number of cases, it's just kind of like using a tall glass versus a shorter cup. They can fit the same amount. It's just that one is spread out more than the other. And so on this graph, I've labeled the exponential growth because there's definitely exponential growth. And I know you saw it already. I could tell that you were like, wait a minute, that looks familiar. And it does, because we just talked about exponential growth. But we didn't talk about what can happen after exponential growth. So do populations just keep growing indefinitely? Not usually. And there's a reason for that. And my dog is barking. Sorry about that. Hold on a second. Daisy, no. Shh. Bad dog. All right. So as you can see, both of these curves have that exponential growth for a period of time, but eventually they both flatten a little bit and decrease. And that's because these graphs are making predictions that show what we want to see, and that is logistic growth. And I say logistic because that leveling off is the result of limited resources. Now, I know that Unit 2 was a long time ago, and so I'm going to remind you what logistic growth is. In this case, I'm using a graph that shows the total coronavirus cases in China, and that's starting on January 22nd through March 25th. And you can clearly see the phases. You've got phase 1, exponential growth, where every generation is larger than the previous generation, and it doesn't have to be doubled or tripled or anything, that's mathematically consistent. Just each generation is larger than the previous one. And so here it's the number of cases. So if one person had it here, then 5 people, 10, 17, 26, it's always larger each generation. So phase 1 is exponential growth, and you know that. Phase 2 is where it starts to kind of slow down. Oh, I should mention too that right here, the reason for this spike is the government started allowing them to test people positive based on symptoms rather than just a positive test. And so that's why you get that jump right there. But phase 2, the growth is kind of slowing down. So the population's still growing, but not as quickly. And some possible causes for that in a non-COVID situation would be like decreased birth rate, increased death rate. Think about fish or something. Emigration, they're moving to a different part of the stream. Increased competition with other fish, or disease, parasites, that sort of thing. So what is slowing it here for COVID? We'll talk about that. And then phase 3 is when we see this leveling out. The logistic growth, the line levels out because of the limiting factors. So in this case, that would be the leveling off of new cases. We would want like 0, ideally, new cases, because this graph counts how many people have been diagnosed so far. And if, if at this point it was 142, 143, 44, 45, 46, 47, 47, 47, 47, 147. You want it to stay the same. So 0 more cases would cause that leveling off. But how are we going to get to 0 more cases? Well, first of all, I should say that there can be a little bit of fluctuation in this leveled off area. But for the most part, it stays about the same. So one day you might have 2 new cases, the next day you might have 0 cases, but for the most part, it's leveled off. And a population can remain there indefinitely, depending on the conditions, because everything is really kind of in balance. Remember homeostasis, unit 4, homeo means same, stasis, to stay, so to stay the same. So it's a stable population size. Phase 3 is also known as carrying capacity. And typically that's defined as the maximum number of individuals a particular species in a particular environment can support without much stress. In other words, how much can that environment carry before things start to get kind of rough? And this is why elevators and movie theaters and even cars have capacity, because if the capacity is exceeded, things start to get unpleasant and maybe even dangerous. Can you imagine going to the movie theater that is supposed to hold 100 people, but they let 400 people in? Like, 300 people aren't going to get a place to sit, or they're going to be standing in front of you even if you are sitting. It would be unpleasant. Or think about the hallways at school during passing time, or right after school especially. They are bursting at the seams, and they are probably over their carrying capacity. It's not safe even to walk through the hall. It's not efficient. They're at carrying capacity. But in the case of COVID-19, we want to reach a point where the number of people testing positive on a particular day is roughly equal to the number not testing positive. So in other words, 0. And that would be the limited growth. In order to get that logistic growth, however, we need to have a limited resources. And here's where the problem is. For COVID-19, right now, there's only one factor that will limit the spread, and that is preventing the virus's access to your respiratory system cells. Let me say that again. There is only one limiting factor, and that is prevention of the virus from accessing your respiratory cells. Now, with many other viral-caused illnesses, we have other limiting factors that we can fall back on, like immune system memory. For example, if you've already gotten a cold this year, you're not going to get that same cold again. That's how vaccines work too. They rely on your immune system memory. We'll talk about that a lot coming up. Chemicals to boost your immune system. Nothing's really working against COVID yet. Antiviral medications, lower spread rates, which is what we're going to try and do, and then access to life-saving technology when you need it. Now, again, with COVID-19, there's only one limiting factor, and that is why you are there and I am here. It's enforced social distancing. If the virus can't reach your respiratory system cells, then you can't get infected. And that's why school is canceled, and why we need to wash our hands, and why we have to stay 6 feet away from individuals outside of our immediate family, and why the state is on lockdown. It's also why China's growth curve has hit that logistic growth. They reached carrying capacity because they limited, effectively, the virus's ability to infect new cells, and that leveled out the curve. Now, a couple days ago, I showed you how the US's growth curve is growing exponentially, and the same is true for quite a few countries. So I have a data table here that compares Italy, France, Germany, Spain, and the United States. And you can see that I started it when each country had about 150 cases. So spanning from February 23rd to March 5th. Each of these countries had about 150 cases. And I know that this is some outdated data now, because it ends on the 16th of March, but I'm trying to make a point, so stay with me here. What I didn't include on that table was South Korea's logistic growth, because right away, well, I shouldn't say right away. Well, yes, right away, South Korea took strict quarantine steps to limit the spread from the very beginning. And that even included having apps on their phone that tracked who was infected and where they had been. I mean, they were just on it. And consequently, their growth curve, which is right here to the right, shows that logistic or leveled off carrying capacity. And because of that, because they've been able to slow the spread and flatten the curve, their hospitals haven't been overwhelmed the way that some countries' hospitals have. Now in graph 3, we look at another country, and they didn't take as strict a measures to try and limit the spread of the virus. And you can see that rather than logistic growth, they had exponential growth. So on March 1st, their hospitals filled up. March 10th, some patients weren't able to get care. On March 13th, there was ventilators shortages, mask shortages, doctors were getting sick, so there was not enough doctors and nurses to care for the patients. And so we end up with a different growth curve. Now here's graph 4, and this shows New York City. And this was forecasted probably about 2 weeks ago. And it says, based on this and other data, and by this I mean the flattening of the curve versus exponential curve and how it's worked out for other countries that are similar and not as similar to us. Whatever, all that data, the US has concluded, obviously, that we need to get back to our normal. And the fastest way to do that is strict quarantine for now. We want that flattened curve, not the exponential curve. And so that's why a lot of states are on total lockdown. Minnesota, of course, being one of them. Now, as you can see in the data table on the previous page, the US was approximately 14 days behind Italy. If I go back here, it's about 14 days or 2 weeks behind Italy. And so scientists then plugged numbers into a simulator and created models if we strictly quarantined right from the beginning, or if we did not follow strict quarantine from the beginning. So here it's forecasting as Italy, how they went about containing the virus, versus forecasting as South Korea. And those two hypothetical models have resulted in two very different growth curves. Now, I don't know if you've been keeping up with what's been going on in New York, but for whatever reason, and I'm sure there are many reasons, this is where we are in New York. And in fact, I know the 27th has come and gone now. Sorry. Hopefully someone else is going to answer that.
Wireless caller. Call from wireless caller.
All right, I hung up on them. I don't know who they were, but they weren't as important as you, obviously. So anyway, the prediction ended up being the reality, and their hospitals have filled up, and some patients haven't been able to get the care or access to the resources that they need. So, I think that's it. If you have any questions, email me, call me, text me. I won't hang up on you guys. But for now, just go do your Schoology assignment. See ya. Bye.